A distinguished black man, hands cuffed behind his back, stood in the middle of a crowded terminal, eyes from every direction drilling into him, some curious, some smug, others indifferent. The sting of humiliation burned hotter than the metal around his wrists. Rage bubbled beneath his composed expression, but he refused to let it take control. Why him? Why now? Was it because he was a successful black man? Because he wore a tailored suit with too much confidence? Because power in black skin unsettled those who'd rather see it chained? The officers around him wore smug looks, convinced they had made a high-profile bust. But they had no idea, no clue whose wrists they had shackled, no inkling that the man they just humiliated held the authority to decide the future of men exactly like them. What would happen when the truth came to light? Would they regret it? Would justice turn on those who were supposed to enforce it? Let's dive into this story, a collision between bias and truth, power and prejudice, and witness how it all unraveled. It was a brisk Saturday afternoon at Briarfield International Airport, and the terminal was alive with sound and movement. Travelers streamed through the arrival gates, the rhythmic clatter of suitcase wheels echoing on the marble floors. Flight announcements floated through the air, weaving into the symphony of chatter, motion, and airport life. From one of the recently arrived flights from Baltimore, Malcolm Reddick stepped off the jet bridge, his posture tall, measured, and commanding. At 60, Reddick still carried himself with the discipline of his years on the bench. His charcoal gray suit was flawless, crisp white shirt pressed to perfection, a deep blue silk tie nestled under the collar. A black leather briefcase, polished to a mirror shine, hung from his hand. A federal judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals, Reddick had just concluded a multi-day judicial conference. Though fatigue clung faintly to his features, his eyes remained sharp, observant. Years of courtroom experience had trained him to assess every environment quietly, thoroughly. He blended in with the flow of passengers, unhurried and calm. He didn't seek attention, but his polished presence naturally drew a few admiring or curious glances. All he wanted was to retrieve his luggage, head home, and sink into the familiar comfort of his study or the embrace of his family. Elsewhere, near a quieter corner of the terminal, 2 airport officers stood by a support column, monitoring foot traffic. Greg Tanner, a weathered white officer in his early 50s, leaned casually against the wall. His face carried the weight of cynicism, etched lines from years of suspicion and contempt. His eyes were restless, narrowed, scanning the crowd not with concern, but with judgment. Beside him stood his partner, Elliot Brooks, significantly younger. Late 20s, clean-shaven, trying to look alert, but still learning the rhythm of the job. A soft ping came from the security tablet mounted in their patrol cart nearby. Tanner stepped forward and tapped the screen. A new message from the airport's central security system popped up. Alert arrivals area, gate D17. Subject, male, African-American, dark formal suit. Possible possession of controlled substances. Intelligence based on passenger pattern analysis and system profiling. Increased observation recommended. Stop and verify if found. There were no hard facts, no camera footage, just speculation wrapped in vague algorithm-driven suspicion. Profiling, in other words. Tanner's eyes flicked back to the stream of travelers and stopped on Malcolm Reddick. Tall, black, well-dressed, moving with quiet purpose. A slow grin curled across Tanner's face. It was all he needed. He'd seen enough types like this before. Black, successful-looking, wearing what he considered arrogance. To him, Reddick was hiding something. They always were, and now he had a convenient excuse. "Hey, Elliot," Tanner muttered, tapping his partner with the back of his hand, a sinister gleam in his voice. "That one. See him? Tailored suit, walking like he owns the place, looks just like the profile." Elliot glanced over and hesitated. Reddick carried himself with obvious authority. But Tanner was the senior officer, the voice of experience. Yeah, Elliot nodded, though uncertainty crept into his tone. Maybe we should check him out. And just like that, the gears of misjudgment started to grind. Yeah, he fits, Elliot Brooks replied, brushing aside the unease that had crept in. He didn't want to question Tanner's instincts. After all, he was new to the job, and Tanner had been doing this for decades. Let's check it out. The two officers separated from their position with deliberate speed, moving through the crowd like wolves in uniformed clothing. They tried to wear professionalism like armor, but the smugness in their stride betrayed their motives. They intercepted Malcolm Reddick just as he was nearing the baggage carousel, cutting him off with little warning. "Sir," Greg Tanner began, voice carefully measured, but laced with a condescending undertone. "We're with airport security. We've received an alert regarding a potential drug suspect matching your description. We need to ask you a few questions." Malcolm stopped, slowly turning to face them. His brows furrowed ever so slightly, not in fear, but in measured confusion. "A drug-related alert?" he asked, his voice calm, low, and crisp. His gaze locked onto Tanner, unwavering. "Could you explain what exactly in that notice led to me being stopped?" He spoke not like a man panicking, but like someone who had recited legal code his whole life. He simply wanted a fair answer, due process. The judge's unflinching calm seemed to throw Tanner off balance. He wasn't used to that. Most people stuttered or fidgeted under questioning, especially when drugs were involved. But this man, he stood tall, composed, and questioned them back. Tanner stiffened. That stillness in Malcolm was, in his eyes, not confidence. It was defiance. It was concealment. "This is just standard airport protocol," Tanner replied, his tone growing curt. "We're just verifying a match. Identification, please." Feeling a mix of disbelief and exhaustion, Malcolm opened his briefcase. He withdrew his wallet with steady hands and handed over his driver's license. "Here you go," he said, "but I'd still like to know on what grounds I've been flagged." Tanner took the ID and studied it. Malcolm Reddick, an address in an affluent part of the city. The suit, the shoes, the briefcase. It all added up in his mind to something suspicious. He didn't see a respectable man. He saw a facade. "Malcolm Reddick, huh?" He muttered under his breath, a smirk curling at his lips. "That's a pretty expensive suit you've got on." "Tell me, what kind of business are you in that gets picked up in system alerts for narcotics?" He said it with a sneer, his voice twisting the word business like it left a bad taste in his mouth. The line of questioning had veered sharply from official to personal. Elliot Brooks, watching Tanner take the lead, quickly fell in behind. "Yeah," Brooks chimed in awkwardly, "you don't really look like the usual suspects. I mean, something's definitely off." Malcolm's calm cracked ever so slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of realization. This wasn't about a system alert. It was about him, his skin, his presence, his success. "Officers," Malcolm said evenly, his voice taking on a chill, "I've noticed your questions have shifted from a security alert to commentary about my clothing and profession. That's not only inappropriate, it's discriminatory." The word discriminatory hit Tanner like a slap. He flared. "Discrimination?" he snapped, his voice now openly hostile. "You think this is about race? You're the one acting suspicious. Don't start preaching law like you're better than us. I'm sick of these arrogant types dressing like royalty and looking down on real people." The mask of professionalism shattered. Tanner's words grew uglier, coarser, slurs spilled from his mouth like venom. Brooks, trying to mimic Tanner's aggression, stepped forward too, his hand instinctively resting near his utility belt. "You better shut up and comply," he warned. "You're not helping yourself here." Malcolm realized then that there was no more room for calm debate. These weren't officers conducting a lawful investigation. They were angry men driven by their own fears and bias. "I'm done entertaining this farce," he said firmly. "I'd like to speak with your commanding officer immediately." To Greg Tanner, that request was the final insult, a challenge to his authority. His face twisted into fury. "Oh, now you want the boss?" he growled. You think you can talk your way out of this? I believe you're resisting. Brooks, cuff him. Check his bag. Malcolm raised his hand instinctively to stop them. Don't touch me. This is an unlawful arrest. But it was too late. Tanner had already made up his mind and his mistake. Malcolm's calm demand to speak with a supervisor was, to Greg Tanner, the ultimate offense. A direct threat to his authority in public view. His jaw clenched, his face contorting with rage. "Oh, you think you can call the shots now?" Tanner exploded. "You're resisting an officer, clear as day. I have every reason to suspect you're hiding something." He was scrambling for justification, returning to the original drug alert, desperately trying to mask his prejudice with procedure. "Brooks!" he barked, voice sharp. "Cuff him! Search his bag!" Elliot Brooks hesitated. The man in front of him still hadn't made a single aggressive move, only spoken with clarity and composure. But Tanner's command came like a thunderclap. And in that pressure-filled moment, Brooks acted. He stepped forward quickly, reaching for Malcolm's arm. "What do you think you're doing?" Malcolm's voice rang out with protest as he pulled slightly back. "This is an unlawful detainment. You have no right to lay a hand on me." In the split second of tension, he instinctively swatted Brooks's arm away, not with aggression, but in self-defense. But that was all Tanner needed. "Look, he's fighting us!" he shouted, rushing forward to assist, eyes blazing with a twisted mix of triumph and fury. Suddenly, the scene spiraled into chaos. There, in the heart of Briarfield Airport, travelers froze or scattered as two officers physically struggled to subdue an older black man in a suit. Phones rose into the air, recording. Voices gasped. A child cried out. Malcolm fought only with words. "Stop! You're making a mistake! This is illegal!" But words weren't enough. The cold clink of handcuffs echoed off the tiled floor as his wrists were yanked behind him, locked tightly. A sharp jolt of pain shot up his arms. His briefcase hit the floor with a thud, contents spilling slightly. But it wasn't the physical discomfort that burned the most, it was the humiliation. A man who had upheld justice his entire life, now treated like a street criminal, humiliated before a sea of strangers because of the color of his skin and the confidence in his stride. Tanner stood over him, panting from the scuffle, wearing a crooked smile of triumph. "Thought you were somebody, huh?" he sneered, "all dressed up, acting important. Let's see how loud you talk at the station. We'll find what you're hiding. You're not a judge, you're a fake." The word fake landed like a slap. Malcolm closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, swallowing the taste of rage and grief. This wasn't the end. He knew it. This was just the beginning. The officers began escorting him through the terminal, still muttering smug comments under their breath, oblivious to the gathering crowd of recording onlookers. Passengers watched, some with pity, others with disbelief, many with quiet horror. As they neared a side corridor, Tanner pulled out a small notepad and clicked open a pen. "All right," he barked, pausing to jot down information. "Full name, occupation, speak." Despite the dull ache in his wrists and the unbearable sting to his dignity, Malcolm Reddick lifted his head. His voice, steady and unwavering, cut through the surrounding murmur of the crowd. Malcolm Reddick. Tanner scribbled the name lazily in his notebook. Reddick. Fancy. He glanced up with a sneer. "Now what is it you do, Mr. Reddick? What kind of gig lets you strut around like royalty?" Malcolm met his eyes. There was no hesitation. The moment had come, not to save himself, but to force them to see the enormity of their mistake. "I'm a federal judge," he said, his voice firm and deliberate. He let the words sit for a beat before continuing. "United States Court of Appeals, 10th Circuit." The silence that followed was immediate and deafening. Even the background noise of the airport seemed to vanish in an instant, like someone had muted the world. All that remained was the stunned stillness around them. Greg Tanner's expression collapsed into a pale mask of disbelief. His pen slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a soft clatter. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came, only fragments of confusion and dawning dread. Judge? Federal! He stammered, his voice cracking, trembling with the weight of realization. He took a small step backward, blinking as if waking from a nightmare. Federal. Judge. 10th Circuit? Greg Tanner repeated, his voice cracking like dry timber under pressure. The color drained from his face as though the words themselves had punched the air out of his lungs. He stumbled backward slightly, eyes wide with horror, staring at Malcolm Reddick as if he were a ghost risen from the grave. Across from him, Elliot Brooks reacted even worse. The cuffs in his hands slipped loose, and he instinctively let go of Malcolm's arms as if they were suddenly electrified. He looked at the judge, then at Tanner, then back at the metal on Malcolm's wrists, realizing the gravity of what they'd just done. His hands began to tremble, his knees buckled. "Oh, no!" Brooks whispered, barely audible, his voice hollow with dread. "It can't be." The emotional whiplash between arrogance and sheer panic hit so fast and hard that even the surrounding passengers, who didn't know the details, could feel it in the air. The shift was unmistakable. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the bravado. In its place, raw fear. Tanner was the first to break from his paralysis, driven by pure survival instinct. Lawsuits, termination, maybe even criminal charges. He could see it all unraveling before his eyes. He stumbled toward Malcolm, nearly bowing, hands out in desperation. "Your Honor." "Please," Tanner begged, his voice cracked and soaked with sweat. We didn't know. I swear to God, we didn't know who you were. It was all a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. Please, Your Honor." He turned sharply toward Brooks, who was still frozen in disbelief. "Brooks, what the hell are you doing? Uncuff him, now!" Brooks jumped like he'd been shocked, fumbling at his belt for the keys. His hands shook so badly he dropped the whole key ring onto the floor. He scrambled to pick it up, cursing under his breath, then struggled to find the right key. Finally, after a few agonizing seconds, the cuffs clicked open, and Malcolm Reddick's wrists were freed. Angry red marks wrapped around them like bruised shackles. Tanner kept talking, his voice breaking into a pathetic mess of remorse and excuses. "We were just following protocol, just trying to do our jobs. The security alert wasn't specific. Oh, it was vague. We went too far. Maybe we were overzealous. But please, don't let this ruin our lives. We have families. We didn't mean." Malcolm said nothing. He simply raised his hands, rubbing at the painful welts left behind by the cuffs. The silence that followed was heavier than any lecture or outburst. He didn't need to say a word. His stillness, his eyes, said it all. A federal judge's silence in that moment was judgment in its most powerful form. And then, cutting through the charged air, came a sharp, steady voice. "What's going on here?" A woman in uniform approached with swift, authoritative steps. Lieutenant Dana Whitlow, the commanding officer for that sector of the airport. Her expression was unreadable, professional, but alert, eyes darting across the scene, assessing every detail. She saw Malcolm Reddick, now free, his sleeves rumpled, wrists red. She saw the crowd, the tension, the sea of smartphones still recording. And then she saw her subordinates, Tanner and Brooks, looking as though they'd seen their careers flash before their eyes. "Officers Tanner, Brooks," she said sharply, "report now!" Both men straightened instinctively, but their composure was gone. Tanner tried to spin the situation, mumbling about a vague system alert, miscommunication, and an effort to verify identity. But his voice wavered. His eyes darted. His explanation stumbled. Whitlow frowned. She had heard enough to know this was no ordinary misstep. She turned to the judge. "Sir," she said respectfully, "I'm Lieutenant Whitlow. May I hear your account of what happened here?" Lieutenant Dana Whitlow listened carefully as Greg Tanner stumbled through a fragmented explanation, his usual assertiveness replaced by panic. His words collided with each other, full of contradictions and empty justifications. Whitlow's brows furrowed in quiet disapproval. She had seen enough in her career to tell when someone was grasping at excuses. She turned to Malcolm Reddick, her demeanor shifting to one of respect and seriousness. "Sir," she said calmly, "I'm Lieutenant Whitlow, overseeing operations in this terminal. I apologize for what you've experienced. Would you be willing to explain what happened from your perspective?" Reddick nodded, his voice measured and composed like a judge laying out the facts of a case. He walked her through the entire ordeal, from the vague and unsubstantiated alert to the profiling, the inappropriate remarks, the denial of his request for a supervisor, the unlawful handcuffing, and the verbal abuse that followed. He didn't raise his voice or show anger. He didn't need to. His words were clear, confident, and deeply damning. Whitlow absorbed every word, her expression darkening as the picture became painfully clear. She didn't need him to repeat his title. She already knew. Turning back to her officers, she spoke with cold clarity. "Tanner, Brooks, hand over your badges, service weapons, and radios. Now," she ordered. Both men froze for a moment, then followed the command with trembling hands. The weight of what they had done settled like a stone over their shoulders. "You are both placed on immediate suspension," Whitlow continued. "Pending a full investigation. You will remain off duty until further notice. Do not speak another word unless requested." Defeated and disgraced, they stepped aside, their careers hanging by a thread. Whitlow turned again to Reddick, this time with a solemn, sincere expression. "Judge Reddick," she said, "on behalf of the entire Briarfield Airport Security Department, I offer our deepest apologies. What occurred today was a gross violation, not only of your rights, but of the values and ethics we are sworn to uphold. We will initiate a full, transparent investigation," she promised. "There will be no cover-up, no leniency." "Do you need medical assistance?" she added, "or anything else at this time?" Reddick shook his head slowly. "The marks will fade," he said. "But I would like to file a formal statement. And one more thing." He paused, then added with unwavering authority, "I'm requesting that the complete footage, video and audio from both officers' body cams be preserved and submitted in its entirety. No edits, no omissions. That will speak for itself." Whitlow nodded firmly. "Understood, Your Honor. Consider it done. That footage will be central to the review." She motioned for another officer to escort him to a private area where he could make his statement in peace. As Malcolm Reddick walked away, he glanced back one last time. Tanner and Brooks stood with their heads lowered, stripped of the power they had so carelessly abused. Their futures uncertain, their actions permanently recorded. Justice, delayed as it was, had begun its course. The incident rippled outward fast. Within hours, news of the wrongful detainment of a federal judge at Briarfield International Airport spread like wildfire. What started as a case of racial profiling and abuse of power became a lightning rod in the national conversation about systemic bias in law enforcement. A high-level internal investigation was launched, overseen by senior airport officials and monitored by federal oversight bodies. As Judge Reddick had insisted, the footage from both officers' body cameras was reviewed in full. The tapes told everything, from the vague system alert being used as flimsy justification, to the racial undertones in the officers' questioning, to the rising aggression, the slurs, and the moment the judge's title was revealed, unraveling their confidence in real time. The video was damning, undeniable, unforgettable. Worse still, a review of the original security alert revealed that the tip had been based on unreliable passenger pattern tracking and weak behavioral profiling. It hadn't warranted even casual suspicion, let alone an arrest. In the end, the findings were conclusive. Greg Tanner and Elliot Brooks had committed severe violations of conduct. They had acted with prejudice, escalated without cause, and illegally detained a citizen. Their behavior was unprofessional, racially charged, and inexcusable. They were terminated from the Briarfield Airport Police Force within days. Tanner's long career ended in disgrace. Brooks's future in law enforcement evaporated before it ever began. Both may still face civil suits, though Judge Reddick has remained quiet on that matter. Back in his chambers at the courthouse, Judge Malcolm Reddick sat at his desk days later, sunlight pouring in through the high windows. The world had moved on, but the moment still lingered, etched in his memory like a scar. He wasn't angry anymore. He was reflective. He knew full well that if he hadn't been Judge Reddick, if he had been just Malcolm, an ordinary black man in a nice suit, things might have gone very differently. The system had recognized him because of his title. But what about those without a title? Without the camera? Without the law at their back? That question stayed with him, and it pushed him, more than ever, to keep fighting for fairness from the bench, for those who go unseen, for those whose voices aren't heard, for those who wouldn't have walked away that day. He looked down at the new stack of case files waiting for him. There was still so much work to do, and he was ready. It was inevitable. Both Greg Tanner and Elliot Brooks were formally dismissed from the Briarfield Airport Police Department. Tanner's decades-long career ended in disgrace. Brooks, barely beginning his path, saw his future erased in mere minutes fueled by bias, power, and unchecked assumptions. Though the department remained quiet on the legal front, whispers suggested that Judge Malcolm Reddick might pursue civil action for emotional distress and violation of rights. Whether or not he did, the consequences were clear. Actions driven by prejudice would not go unpunished. A few days later, in a quiet corner of the federal courthouse, sunlight spilled through tall windows, illuminating neat stacks of legal briefs and case files. Judge Reddick sat at his desk, immersed once more in the rhythm of daily judicial work. But the echoes of the airport still lingered, not in rage or fear, but in reflection. The situation had been resolved swiftly. The system, at least in his case, had worked. But the emotional residue was more complex. He felt a strange blend of relief and sorrow. Relief that justice had prevailed, sorrow that it had to happen in the first place. For a man who had devoted his life to upholding fairness, to sitting behind the bench and delivering truth without bias, being reduced to a suspect, by mere appearance, struck something deep inside. Because he knew one thing for certain: if he hadn't been a federal judge, things could have gone much worse. If he had been just another well-dressed black man, an attorney, a business traveler, a teacher, he might have been searched, detained, falsely accused. He might have had to battle for his dignity in courtrooms he once presided over. His title had protected him, but it also exposed a truth he had long feared. Not everyone gets the benefit of the doubt. Justice had moved quickly for him. But what about the others? What about those who couldn't name-drop a court or cite constitutional rights with confidence? That question stayed with him. He rose from his chair and walked to the window, gazing down at the busy street below. People moved like streams, ordinary lives, unknown stories, unseen struggles. The incident had left its mark, but it had also reinforced his mission. He wasn't just a judge. He was a voice, a witness, a fighter for the voiceless. As an African-American man who had personally experienced racial bias, he understood the urgency. He couldn't stay silent. He wouldn't. His position gave him power, but with it came responsibility. To speak up, to challenge perception, to fight for a justice system that served everyone equally. Malcolm returned to his desk. There was work to be done, and while the road ahead might be long, he faced it with resolve, because he believed in justice, because he had seen injustice firsthand, and because deep down he knew this fight, no matter how exhausting, was worth it.